Welcome to Songs of Psalms. Welcome. Welcome back. Welcome back to Psalm 89, the Encore. I am MRJ, and I want to welcome you to Songs of Psalms, which is a songwriting study on the book of Psalms. And now we just wrapped up a 7-episode study on Psalm 89, and this is part 2 of our Encore. Yesterday was part 1 of the Encore, and I couldn't finish it all, but today is part 2 of the Encore. And let me tell you, this psalm has been life-changing for me. Not only have I learned a little bit about who the writer is, the songwriter, but we've also gone in and we did a little bit of a deep dive to understand what he was feeling and how he was feeling, and also about how to confront God when things don't line up, things that you're believing for don't line up. So truth be told, I'm having a little bit of a hard time moving on from this psalm. And so I think that's why I'm still on this Encore. I think that's why I'm still here talking about it, because there's still more to say. And I'm trying to land this plane and move on, but I feel like I was so impacted by this psalm, and so that's why I'm still kind of going into it and extracting things from it. And why should you pay attention to this psalm? Why should you pay attention to Psalm 89? You know, there's a lot of nuggets of truth here, a lot that we can continue to learn from. I feel like we've all been in the same place that Ethan the Ezrahite has been when he wrote this psalm. Many of us have felt confused and disappointed and hopeless and anxious and doubtful, fearful, right? When you're facing a situation that you've never faced before, and you're putting your faith and your trust and your hope in God, and you're not seeing answers, right? I feel like Ethan felt like God let him down. He let everybody down. God let him down. And, it's evident because he questioned everything that he was believing in. He was believing in God's promise, and he was waiting for that promise to come to pass, but it didn't. He wasn't seeing anything happen. And so what do you do when you're waiting for something? What do you do when you're waiting for an answer? What do you do when you're waiting for a response? You're expecting something to happen, to change, to improve, to get better, but it's just not working out. Not only is it not working out, it's getting worse, right? It's getting worse. So do you keep believing, or do you quit and surrender and accept that it's not changing? I believe these are the thoughts that Ethan was having. These are the thoughts that he was confronted with. And I don't know for sure that that's exactly what he was thinking, but if you read between the lines of Psalm 89 and you put yourself in his shoes, then you kind of feel what this songwriter was feeling, this musician was feeling, the hopelessness he felt about the things that he saw, that he was witnessing that were happening around him. Their world was collapsing. Their world was collapsing. And I do believe that he was suffering intensely. And his job was to sing songs, right? His job was to sing songs of praise to God. He was the chief musician. And he had the honor to point people back to God, to oversee the choirs and the musicians and the singers. He had that honor to make sure that they were doing their job, that they were writing songs, that they were singing songs of praise, that they were pointing people back to God through those songs. That was his job. That was his job to do that, right? His job was to motivate the people to worship God and put their faith on him, to sing to him. And I believe that he was doing that faithfully. He was doing that with all his heart of hearts. He was doing his job well. He sung the songs of praise, and he was really hopeful that things would turn around, but they were getting worse. The situation was getting worse. It was like, okay, we're doing our thing, but it's not getting better. We're not seeing the answers that we are expecting to see. And I believe that he got to the point where he could no longer sing. He could no longer sing. It was looking grim. And how do we know? How do we know that things were getting worse and bad? We could just look at what he said. Look at verse 42 of Psalm 89. He says, this is what he tells God. He was like, you have exalted the right hand of his foes. He's talking about David. He was telling God, you made this promise to David that he would have an everlasting kingdom, that his kingdom will always endure to the end of time. But right now the kingdom was suffering violence. Like the Babylonians were coming and were taking the people into captivity, and people were being killed and drawn away. And he's like, you have exalted the right hand of his foes, of David's foes. You have made all his enemies rejoice. Indeed, you have turned back the edge of his sword. That means, like, when you're fighting and the sword is supposed to be going forward, the edge is going this way. The edge is going back to you, to harm you. Indeed, you have turned back the edge of his sword and have not supported him in battle. And that just meant like he was, good morning, Daddy. How are you? You have not supported him in battle. You have put an end to his splendor and cast his throne to the ground. You have cut short the days of his youth, and you have covered him with a mantle of shame. That's how we know. That is how we know. Good morning, and God bless you, Abby. That's how we know that things were looking really bad for Ethan. The people were being defeated by their enemies. Israel was being defeated by its enemies. And again, I said this before, but it's not certain, but scholars do believe that this psalm was likely written during the time when, the Israelites were being taken into captivity into Babylon. And Babylon came in and was destroying the people and capturing its people. And so Ethan is here witnessing this, and he, like I said, he was believing in God's presence and his covering and his protection, and he's singing these songs like, God, you're the most great God, and you're our defender and our protector. But they weren't seeing that was happening. They weren't seeing that happen. And so Ethan was like, thank you, Daddy. I love you. Thank you for being here. Ethan was like, how could this be? How could God hand over his beloved people into the hands of the enemies? And so Ethan was like, this is a hard pill to swallow. How can I keep singing when my people are being destroyed? How can I keep telling them, put your faith in God, put your hope in God? I felt like he probably got to a place where he couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't bear this heaviness, this weight on his shoulders. He was a leader. He was one of the wisest men. He was one of the wisest men right before Solomon was, Solomon was known for his wisdom, but this chief musician, he was known to be so wise. And so for a man of his wisdom and his influence, he was like, he was, you know, just beside himself, I guess, because it was too much to bear. And so Psalm 89 is this conversation that he's having with God. And if I were him, I probably would have felt betrayed. Like, God, we've been singing your praises. We are your people, and you're letting us down. How can you let this happen? And we all blame God, right? When things are bad and things are happening that are bad, we blame God. And we say to him, like, why did you let this happen? Right? We've been there. We see a tragedy happen and we're like, God, why did you let this happen? And Ethan was like, God, did you fall asleep on the job? He was like trying to wake him up. He was like, look, verse 43. Indeed, you have turned back the edge of his sword and have not supported him in battle. He just felt like, God, you walked out on us. You walked out on us. You're letting our enemies defeat us. And Ethan was, he was right to be very upset. He had every reason to be upset and to be hurt. And he used Psalm 89 to be very vocal about it. And, if you think about it, like, how many of us truly are vocal when it matters? When it matters, how many of us are really vocal when something bad is happening? He turned his pain and his sorrow, his disappointment, his anger, his confusion, he turned that into a prayer. Because that was the only thing he knew he could do at this point. And that's a huge lesson for us. That is a huge lesson for us, that do we turn our questions and our doubts and our unbelief, do we turn that into a prayer, or do we just do we hide it and keep it inside and talk about it to other people, but we don't go to the one that could possibly answer the questions for us? Ethan, he stopped singing because he just couldn't anymore. He just could not sing anymore. He was like, I can't do this. I need to confront you. So he did something about the situation. He was like, I need to make a difference. And so he didn't sit back. He didn't hide. He didn't try to escape from the enemy. Some people would have been like, let's pack our bags. Let's go to Egypt. The Babylons are coming. Let's go to the other direction. Let's go somewhere else. He didn't do that. The enemy was coming against his people, and the only thing that he could do, he didn't muster the army. He didn't say, let's get the army together. Let's stand our ground. Let's fight. No, he didn't do that. What did he do? He prayed. Ethan prayed. He didn't back down. He didn't hide. He prayed. He went to the Father, and he went to get his attention. And he said, I'm compelled to remind you of the promise you made. You made a promise that we will have an everlasting kingdom. You made a promise that David's kingdom would endure as long as the sun and the moon endured. And by reminding God of everything he's previously said, he was like, you need to do something. He was accusing God of falling asleep on the job and not keeping his promise. And so I'm just going to leave this here because I have a lot more to say. my Encore is extending as much as my my Psalm 89 study. We wrapped this study up already. You can go back and see episodes